Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Melissa Diaz. I'm the curator at the Deering Estate. Some of you I've met before and some of you are new names, but familiar perhaps in other ways. Today, usually I like to do this presentation in person, but obviously in this world right now we can't. So I'm going to be doing a kind of 45-minute webinar for you all. I'm going to be sharing with you some images, some information about the Deering Estate, and then afterwards we can have a conversation a little bit more about any questions you may have about the residency, the process and the application, and how things might look a little different next year as a result of our response to the pandemic. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you all so you can see some beautiful images of the estate, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm also recording this session and then we'll be posting it onto our YouTube channel. So if you missed any information or you want to kind of go back and hear it again, you'll be able to do that as well. Okay, so we're starting here with this beautiful aerial shot of the Deering Estate from the water, so from the bay. The Deering Estate is called after Charles Deering, who was our founder, but its history is much longer. So actually, before I get there, a little bit about how I usually start these presentations. I want to give all artists who are interested in our program a general overview of our history, because so much of the residency and the opportunities and resources available to artists come from our history and what we have to offer. So I just want everybody to kind of have a general overview. If you've never visited, I encourage you to before the application process is closed, so that way you get an in-person experience. But this should be able to give you at least a little bit of a taste of the kind of things that we offer. So the actual site of the Deering Estate was purchased around 1912 to 1913 by Charles Deering, but the land was occupied for much longer than that. We have several archaeological sites that date the presence of human activity on this site from the late Pleistocene period. So one of the really interesting factors of the Deering Estate that's not usually that well known is that we are an active archaeological site. As we go through the slideshow, we'll see how some artists in the past have engaged with that part of our history and how we're still actively learning more and more about this aspect of this land. So it is something that's exciting for artists who are interested in any kind of social history, or human history practice to be involved in that. The Deering Estate itself is about over 444 acres. So really, when you visit us and you see the manicured kind of front lawn and this area here with the boat basin, this is just a fraction of what we have. We have over 9 different ecosystems on the estate lands. We have miles and miles of hiking trails that are accessible to the public and some that are not, but would be accessible to artists and residents with a guide with them. So there's really just so much to offer here for artists in terms of material for work and research. So we'll kind of get into a couple of those things to start with. First, just a general overview. This is a photograph from around the time that Charles Deering started construction on his stone house, which was completed in 1922. So you can see it tiny there, right down there. Again, he bought the land in 1913. He was really intrigued with South Florida because his brother James had purchased Vizcaya and constructed Vizcaya. So he was very interested in creating his own estate in a different part of South Florida. He was drawn to this land in particular because of obviously the site, the water, and all of that, but it was pretty untouched by development. And one of the really fascinating aspects of Charles Deering's history is that he was kind of really ahead of his time in understanding how developed South Florida would become, how popular it would become. And when he purchased this land, he kind of put a wall around it and created almost like a time capsule to prevent any further development within this structure, which is why we have one of the largest pine rockland areas, because most of the pine rocklands were destroyed around this area for constructing houses and different structures. So he was really ahead of his time in knowing how popular this would become and in saving the environment and these native habitats for future generations. Most of the land is on the high ground of the Miami Rock Ridge, which is one of the highest elevation points in South Florida. So when you visit the house, you'll tend to see that when you're standing like where the stone house is, you'll see like a dip going down towards the bay, because that is one of the higher points on this rock ridge. Before Deering's arrival, as I mentioned, we have 10,000 years of human history. He had himself seen the town of Cutler, which was a pioneer town that started around the turn of the century, when Flagler's Railroad was intended to be much closer to the water around here. So we'll talk a little bit about the architectural structures and how the Richmond Cottage in particular was constructed in 1896 as a response to the potential building boom that would have happened had the Flagler Railroad been closer to this site. This area, as I mentioned, is also active archaeologically. We have a long history of human contact here in the land. In particular, probably our oldest is the paleo-human existence of these early fossils and human remains that were found at the Cutler Fossil Site, which is part of the Deering Estate. Those date back to, as I mentioned, the late Pleistocene period, along with the remains of several other paleo animals, including dire wolves and certain types of cave bears and lions. So about 10,000 years ago, this land was heavily populated by these ancient animals as well as these early humans. We are still in the process of studying that part of our history. We work very closely with FPAN, which is the archaeological arm of the state of Florida. And so those scientists and archaeologists are frequently visiting the Deering Estate and doing research, and whenever applicable, they were able to share that with us. We have a few artists in the past and currently that are really, really interested in this particular part of our history. So whenever we can, one of the resources that we offer them is that we can pair them with archaeologists, or at least interviewing archaeologists, so that they can get a better sense of where we are in terms of understanding these early human habitats. We also have evidence of the Tequestas being the native tribe that occupied most of South Florida from around the 3rd century BCE to around the 1800s, when they were killed off. So at one point, the Tequestas would actually travel up and down the coast, and Deering Estate can connect, if you travel the Tequesta Trail, all the way up to the Miami Circle and Brickell. So they'd actually move up and down the coast through there. At the Deering Estate, because Charles Deering built this wall in 1913, he was able to protect certain elements of Tequesta life that remained relatively untouched. So two of the really key features that we have on site is the Tequesta Burial Mound, which is a sacred space. We do allow visitors to visit it through the safety of a boardwalk, but no one is ever allowed to, not even staff, allowed to step foot on the burial mound because it is considered sacred. We also have the Tequesta Midden, and a midden is essentially a accumulation of things, like maybe like a trash pile, or almost like a kind of pile of things that they might return to coming and going up and down the coast. So that's really where they found a lot of these shell tools, a lot of really interesting artifacts that tell us a lot about the lives of the Tequestas, how they hunted, the kind of jewelry that they would wear. And we work really closely with a lot of different historical entities, both in South Florida and in Tallahassee and Gainesville, to unpack and understand those artifacts. So there's a lot of really interesting history there, and the Tequestas because they were killed off, we are still kind of learning and more about them. So that's another avenue that is still very active in terms of research. And, you know, we're really proud and happy to be part of that scholarship. So that's another area of interest that some artists have gravitated towards. After the Tequesta's presence, the Seminole peoples were also occupants of this land until they were driven out and pushed into the Everglades. But I'm very happy to say that when the Deering Estate became a public entity and run by the state and Miami-Dade County, we have developed a much, actually pretty great working relationship with the Seminole tribes, and they're the ones that have really helped and guide us in terms of the way we should protect and keep the burial mound and these types of sacred sites very safe from any further infringement or destruction. So we are constantly working with them as well to continuously build our scholarship on this part of our history. And again, that's a kind of partner resource that is also open to our artists in residence. I mentioned the biodiversity at the Deering Estate. So we have 8 Florida ecosystems. I think I said 9 earlier. Sorry, that was an artist project that invented a 9th one. But we have 8 Florida ecosystems, including, as I mentioned, the largest pine rockland area in South Florida, which is 87 acres. It's quite sad that that's the largest, considering how much there used to be, but it's a wonderful space. I'll show you some photos of it a little bit later. We have tropical hardwood forests, hammocks, and then, you know, our beautiful mangrove forests, which date back hundreds and hundreds of years. Really, really quite breathtaking. We have a lot of geological work that's being done on the site because of the Miami Rock Ridge and being part of the Atlantic Coastal Ridge. There are a lot of different caves and solution holes. Some are no longer active, so you're actually able to climb into them. The caves, we typically don't allow the public to go in them because it's not 100% safe, but we do have artists in the past who've wanted to. So if that's of interest, then what we usually do is we pair you with one of our naturalists who go there all the time, and then they can guide you safely in and out of those areas. We also have ongoing surveys of our animal life and plant life at the Deering Estate with a focus on, of course, native and naturalized species. We work really closely with derm and eel to make sure that no invasive species are coming into our ecosystems. We also work with a lot of the Florida Wildlife Association groups to make sure that our animals are protected. We've got a bunch of different really interesting birds that migrate through the Deering Estate because we're part of the Southern Flyway. So one of our naturalists is actually a bird expert. And he works really closely with a lot of these different groups to identify these species and make sure that their numbers are still where they should be. So this is also some, if you're interested in eco art or nature in any way, I mean, these are all really, really rich areas and resources for artists as well. The Deering Estate has a really wonderful, rich history of working with both scholars and artists, and that dates back to Charles Deering's own life. So the artist residency is really a product of maintaining Charles Deering's legacy as not only an environmentalist and conservationist, but also a champion and patron of contemporary art. Some of the groups that Charles worked with early on were John Kunkel Small, who was the first curator of the New York Botanical Gardens. And he invited John Kunkel Small to come to the Deering Estate to kind of document and record and study all of the natural flora and fauna that were found in his land. And so a lot of these geological and ecological surveys are well documented in the archives of the New York Botanical Garden, as well as us, because we were able to share some of the information, as well as the Montgomery archives of Fairchild. Charles Deering also was very good friends with David Fairchild, and they talked a lot about both native and non-native species. There are some non-native species that were introduced, some orchids and some cactuses and cacti, through the influence of David Fairchild. So there's this really interesting connection to botany and to this type of research that we have here at the Deering Estate. Let me see what happened here. Oops, sorry, it's stuck here for a second. So while I get this going, the other part of his legacy that's really interesting to us is friendship and lifelong commitment to the arts, in particular contemporary art of his time. So Charles Deering not only collected art, but he oftentimes, like collectors do today, would befriend the artists that he collected and kind of support their careers long-term, engaged in conversations with them, and really felt he himself was kind of an artist at heart. So we continue that legacy here at the Deering Estate by working with contemporary artists through both our Artist in Residency program as well as our exhibition program. Here we go. So that's really the cornerstone of where we start now with talking about what is available to an artist here at the Deering Estate. And I'm sorry, I think this is stuck for some reason. Oh. So let me see if I can, just give me 1 second. I'm so sorry. Let me just see if I can figure this out. Okay. 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 So I'm sorry, I can't do the full screen. So I'm gonna have to do the non-full screen. So that way I can at least show you these pictures without it getting stuck on me. Okay. What's going on here? Okay, so let me see. Okay, hold on, let me unmute you and then we'll get back started because I think okay. Yes, hello?
Yes, we hear.
Okay, so if I'm gonna share the screen back with you, it was a problem with my PowerPoint, so I'll go start back where we left off on the John Kunkel Small.
No, take your time.
Okay.
Take your time.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Slideshow. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Okay, so in terms of our animal life, we have lots of naturalists on site that are experts on these animals and know a lot more than I do. But some of the more common species that you'll see, of course, are our manatees that love to live in the Boat Basin. We do have otters, we have all different types of butterflies and bugs, in particular, the Atala butterfly, which is a personal favorite. The story behind this beautiful tiny little butterfly is that it was thought to be almost extinct because it really can only live with one plant, its host plant, which is our kunti. It's an important plant to the Tequestas as well. And the kunti, for a number of reasons, just wasn't as prevalent as it had been during the Tequestas' time around South Florida. And so it was believed that the butterfly had died off. But if you come to Deering Estate, you are guaranteed to see not one, but several of these beautiful tiny little butterflies fluttering about because we do have so many kunti plants on site. So it's a wonderful story, and it just is kind of a great example of the way in which we are dedicated to environmental preservation. And we work with so many groups to be able to achieve that. This is a site from the waterways. Some of the resources that we do have are kayaks that you can request to use if you want to utilize any of the waterways. This is Chicken Key down here, which is the name that we used to call this small island where a lot of birds come to roost. So no humans are allowed to actually go on to Chicken Key, but you are allowed to kayak around it. And just another great view of the boat basin. Other little critters that kind of pop in and out of the Deering Estate. A little bit about Charles himself that I mentioned. He's the cornerstone of why we have the residency program. Charles was a great collector, originally from Maine, and eventually took over the family business of International Harvester, which was an agricultural infrastructure company that basically built agricultural equipment, not to be confused with Deering, or I'm sorry, John Deere equipment, because it's not, but International Harvester was really, really big in the turn of the century and up until the 30s and 40s. So that's where the Deering family got the bulk of their wealth, but Charles himself was in the military, was in the Navy as a young man, and as a result traveled around the world and befriended a lot of different artists and learned a lot about different cultures along the way. Before coming to South Florida, he actually intended to live the rest of his life in Europe and bought not one, but two castles in Spain, in Sitges, just outside of Barcelona. It's about 60 minute train ride outside of Barcelona. And these were beautiful castles that he painstakingly worked to refurbish. And that's really where he had intended to keep his art collection. But as a result of like a number of personal issues as well as world issues, because, you know, World War I was about to happen, and there was a lot of turmoil happening in Europe, he kind of decided to leave, and that's when he came to South Florida, where his brother had already started construction on Vizcaya. And he brought all of his wonderful artworks with him. So we do have original inventories of his collections that included everything from Gauguin to Goya to Rembrandt, Renaissance drawings, ancient Chinese porcelain, beautiful tapestries, ironworks from Spain. So a lot of wonderful things were available in his collection, most of which is not at the Deering Estate. He donated it upon his death to the Art Institute of Chicago and Northwestern University, where he had gone to school. We do have some original paintings and works and objects in the collection, and those are highlighted when you walk through the historic houses. My favorites are those by Ramon Casas, which I'll show you a picture of in just a moment. But it really just shows his dedication to the arts and how much he really felt connected to culture of all different forms. Two of his closest friends and confidants were John Singer Sargent, the American artist who spent most of his time in Europe, similarly to Charles. They knew each other as young men. There's several portraits like the one you see here of Charles Deering done by John Singer Sargent, where you can really see the intimacy and the friendship that these two men had with each other. Sargent came down to the Deering Estate and spent time here. We have evidence of sketches that he prepared that are in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, as well as Harvard University, that he did while he was visiting Deering. And then there's also a series of beautiful watercolor works that he created of Vizcaya, because Sargent was friends with both Charles and James. So the Vizcaya watercolors are oftentimes on tour. You can find them online, and they're really quite breathtaking. Along with this friendship, he also was very close with the Spanish Catalonian painter Ramon Casas y Garbo, which you see Charles here with Casas and other friends, basically socializing outdoors. And then this is what I love. There's a series of notes back and forth and letters that Charles and Ramon would send to each other. And then they would do these little cartoons and caricatures of each other back and forth. So this really shows their friendship in art quite beautifully. Casas was a contemporary artist, a fantastic painter, just one generation older than Picasso, but really was one of Pablo Picasso's earliest teachers, one of the founders of the Four Cats Cafe in Barcelona, so was a really, really important figure in Spanish modern art history. And unfortunately, because of the two world wars, in particular, the Spanish Civil War, there's been some erasure of knowledge about Spanish modern art throughout the rest of the world because of those two moments. And it's really a lot of these different artists being rediscovered by the community that has really helped to understand, give a deeper understanding of this particular interesting moment in Spanish art history. So this is something that I personally really love. I love Casas. He was not just a great artist, but he was also just funny and an intellectual and a graphic designer. You know, some people have compared him to like the Toulouse-Lautrec of Spain, because he has these really beautiful, kind of hilarious and satirical ads for different products that he did for a living. So this part of Charles's friendship and connection to the arts is really where we kind of pivot for the residency, so we can continue to support artists in experimentation and in kind of learning new aspects of their work by supporting them with space, with resources, and time to be able to create. These are some modern photos of the Deering Estate. So you can see the stone house here, and then the Richmond Cottage over here. When Charles bought the land, the Richmond Cottage was already here. It was built by Dr. Samuel Richmond, who was a surveyor for the Flagler Railroad. So the Richmond Cottage is actually constructed in 1896. Now, when Hurricane Andrew flew through South Florida, most of the Richmond Cottage had been destroyed. So it has been painstakingly rebuilt with the original material that was found scattered all over to be able to still be a historic site. And this is where Charles Deering and his wife Marion lived while they were building the stone house. The stone house is done in the Mediterranean Revival style, very similar to a lot of other houses in Coral Gables. And Phineas Paste was the overseer architect for the project. However, there's a lot of differences. If you've been to the Deering Estate versus Vizcaya or any of these other kind of Mediterranean Revival homes, Deering Estate has a lot of unique features that are very much part of its environment. While Charles was very interested in elements that reminded him of his castles in Spain, he also wanted to make a home that was unique to South Florida. And as you walk around, there's a lot of beautiful decorative detail that reflects native flora and fauna and animal life and sea life and marine life throughout the houses that is very much an homage to South Florida and not necessarily trying to replicate something that he had in Europe. Now, what our artists can do. So I'm going to show you some images here of different artists that have been through the Deering Estate program and things that they've been interested in. So here you have John Bailey, who was a previous artist in resident and now is our artist fellow, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end, with one of those Florida archaeologists, Jeff Ransom. And they're at the Cutler Fossil Site, which is the location where those human remains from the late Pleistocene period were discovered. These up here are a series of drawings that he did as a result of his time researching the Cutler Fossil Site and kind of sketching in it. So that's something that he was really interested in. Christina Peterson, a former artist in residence, really is a multidisciplinary artist. She works with performance and video and sound and drawing and installation. And she had a solo exhibition that really kind of transformed the interior of the stone house into a really, really interesting meditation on the mythology of sight. And here she is working on one of these performances within the mangrove forest. These are, again, different things you can do. This is Pioneer Winter. He was not an artist in residence, but he was an exhibiting artist. And here he did a dance performance in the middle of the boat basin on a canoe. So this was something, and then there's a sculpture behind him, but this is something that he had proposed, and we were able to help him find support for to create here. Michelle Grant Murray is a current artist in residence. She's returned. She's a project resident. This is her doing a dance performance, a movement performance, the Mangrove Boardwalk. I do have to say that this was done in 2012 or 2013. The Mangrove Boardwalk was destroyed during Hurricane Irma. So it is not accessible right now. It's basically a pile of wood, but it is being restored. It's a project that is happening or starting right now. Because we're a county facility and a state facility, there's a lot of red tape when we have to rebuild things. So this isn't something that's accessible right now. I always have to warn people because it's wonderful. But hopefully we will be able to have it back online within a year or two. This is the Great Hall inside of the stone house. Sometimes people call this the ballroom, and it's ironic now to have it an installation with the spheres from Laura Marsh. But it was never used as a ballroom when Charles Deering lived here. He always used this space as a gallery for his collection. So in keeping with that, this is our indoor gallery space for temporary exhibitions, which I either curate myself or we invite curators to come and curate individual shows here. The floor looks beautiful and tiled, but it's actually stamped concrete, and everything in the house is concrete, including the ceiling. If you've seen older pictures or you visited the Deering Estate a few years ago, the ceiling probably looked very differently, and that's because when it was taken over by the county, they didn't really have a way of understanding historic architectural preservation. But over the years, we have been able to hire a lot of museum professionals and registrars and historians that have done the work to look back at what the house might have looked like during Charles's time when it was originally constructed, and we found out that the ceiling was painted white and gilded with those embossed little figures there in those little gold squares. Each of those have a carving of a different either plant life or animal life that either reflects South Florida or Spain. So it's really interesting to go and walk through and see the ceiling because you really get a kind of history of the things that mattered to Charles in terms of natural history. We encourage a lot of projects for our Spring Contemporary to be outdoors. So this is a geometric sculpture by Karen Rifus in our mango grove. We do the Spring Contemporary once a year, and that's really when artists can engage the entire site. I really like to work with artists on this project because more often than not, our artists don't have opportunities to explore outdoor public sculpture. So this has been a really great project to be part of and to visit even before I joined the Deering Estate, because you really get to see a lot of great interactive sculpture that embraces the landscape that it's in and really does a wonderful job of drawing attention, not just to the arts, but to our natural environment. So this leads me to the nuts and bolts of the residency. So we offer two types of residencies, the on-site studio and the non-studio project residency. In terms of what you get as an artist, the only difference between these two programs is that one offers a studio on site and the other one does not. But everything else in terms of access to staff, access to the natural areas, access to kayaks, access to our archives, and to our partner organizations, everything else is the same. In terms of the kind of artists we work for or work with, the sky is really the limit. We offer visual, performing, literary, cross-disciplinary residencies that include anything from dancers to musicians to poets, painters, sculptors, performance artists, video artists. Really, there's no limitation in terms of what your medium and discipline is. The residency itself is day only, so there's no overnight stays allowed. However, if you are, it doesn't matter if you're a studio or a project resident, if you want to do something that requires you to be there, let's say late into the evening or at sunrise or sunset, and that's at like 5 in the morning, we always can accommodate you with advance notice. So I always ask people to give me preferably a week notice for when they want to come on site, but you know, things happen, and sometimes I've had an artist call me with like a day's notice and say, I need to be there at 5 a.m. tomorrow. And usually I can accommodate because I love working with artists, and I know sometimes the creative spirit doesn't always plan ahead, and it just happens and you have to roll with it. And that's when the best things can happen and the best things can be born. So the 7 to 7 is our rule, but we can, you know, go outside of that kind of time period for different reasons. However, overnight stays are never allowed. We also welcome shared and collaborative residencies. So in the past, I know we had an artist who lived half the time here and half the time abroad, but they had a partner that they worked with and collaborated with. So the partner would take over the residency while they were away. And that's totally fine. You would just have to apply as a collaborative. So technically you would be understood as a collaborative, even if you guys are, the 2 of you or the 3 of you are taking turns using the studio, that's fine. But you would be identified as a collaborative. Okay. So I'll go through the studios really quick. The studio residency program, again, is open to all artists. However, there are some limitations. The artists cannot be students. So if you're a student, there are other opportunities for you, but residencies are really only open to non-students. And the main reason for this is because if you're in a BFA or MFA program, especially if you're in an MFA program, chances are, or hopefully, you should be given a proper studio space by your university or college. So you can contact me if you want to talk about something else you can be doing. But really, the residency is devoted to graduated artists. Studio residencies can be 6 months to a year. When you apply, it's encouraged that you consider what you want to accomplish or achieve within that period. And then when the application is being considered, we'll look into that project and see, you know, how long it will take and what really is comfortable for you to be at the Deering Estate. The studios are in historic structures. So it's the carriage house and the powerhouse. The carriage house that you see here was originally a garage. The bottom floor was the garage for Charles's vehicles. And then the top floor, which is where my office is, was the apartment for the mechanic that lived on site. So these are historic buildings. They were built also in 1922, which means that there are some restrictions in terms of what you can do to them. What I have done since I started is I worked with a local carpenter to kind of retrofit some wooden walls into certain studio spaces. So that way, if you are a painter or if you work with drawing and you need to work on the wall, you can basically nail into the wall without a problem, because we're not allowed to nail or drill or add any holes to any of the historic buildings. But Some of them, as I mentioned, have been retrofitted. One of the studios, the literary studio, is considered a quote unquote clean studio. So there is no messy artwork that can be done in there. So it's really ideal for poets, for writers, musicians, and that kind of thing, but not really painters or sculptors. Project residencies are much more versatile, and their timelines are really based on the proposed project. Okay, same as studio residencies, you can be on site from 7 to 7. We do have workspaces available if you want to work on site on something. Overnight stays, again, are not allowed, and basically all of the same restrictions in terms of not open to students is basically the same. However, there might be some flexibility based on the project. So in a nutshell, that's basically what you're responsible for here in these bullet points. And I'll go through them really, really quickly, but then I'll also talk about how next year might be a little bit different. So what is the responsibility of the residency? Artists have to agree to spend no less than 30 hours per week on their artistic discipline or project on or off site. So that means that if you're a project resident or you're a studio resident, that whatever you're working towards, that you can devote that time to it. As part of your residency, you have to allow, if you have a studio, visitor access to studios. Now, because of COVID-19, we are not allowing anyone into the historic houses or the studios. So it's actually the opposite right now, where the studios, artists are allowed to use their studios as studios, but they are not allowed to let people inside of them because the spaces aren't that big and it's just not safe right now. So I don't know when that ban will be lifted. You know, if you're applying this year, it's really to start next year in 2021. So I don't know what 2021 will hold, but basically, if we're still in a pandemic situation, then you wouldn't be able to give visitors access to your studios. However, if you have, let's say, a collector or a museum professional that would like to come and make an appointment, you would have to do that through me, and we would get special approval for that, the same way we do kind of special private tours. So there are exceptions, but basically you can't let anyone who's like just walking around into your studio space. Okay, the Deering Estate is open every single day, so your studio is accessible every single day, or if you're a project resident, you can come any day with the exception of Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. Those are the only 2 days that we close. We also close if there is a crazy hurricane, so you wouldn't be there anyway, but those are the only reasons why we typically close. We like to have our artists engage with our public as much as possible, and I have been working to try to create events and opportunities for that to happen. We have several what we call signature events at the Deering Estate, including our Seafood Festival and Valentine's Day concert, which we would like to encourage our artists to participate in some way, shape, or form. Again, this year there is no Seafood Festival, but we're talking about 2021. I don't know. We are planning for it and we're hoping for it, but next year might be a little bit different, and we're just I'm ready to be very flexible, so we can talk about that as we know more. We do not sell artwork for you, but if you sell work while you're at the residency, that's completely fine. You just ask that 10% of any art sales be donated to the Deering Estate Foundation as per an art on loan agreement that you would complete. And then at the end of the residency, some kind of documentation of what you worked on, whether it's like photos of artwork that was produced there or some type of written description. It just really gives us an archive to be able to document your time here. What we're working on right now, which is not available yet because we're slowly building it up, is a online archive, digital archive of the Artists in Residence program. So this last point is really helpful for you all as artists because it it kind of gives you a platform to be able to share what you did at the Deering Estate, to give you some exposure and include you in our website forever. So that way it's not just a residency that happened in a vacuum and it's gone, but something that, you know, people can look for online and learn more, to discover things about you. And we always link to your artist website and all of that to make sure that it's a really mutually equitable relationship. So those are the responsibilities. The application is not online yet. It will be up, it should be up by September 1st. So if you're participating in this talk or this webinar, I will be emailing you the link to the application on submittable.com. It's pretty straightforward to most residency applications. So if you've applied to residency before, it should be pretty straightforward. And the deadline will be December 1st. And the decision will probably be made mid-January, so we'll be notifying artists around the middle to end of January. Most of the incoming residencies will start in either February or March. There is a funny thing that's happening this year, which makes it different from other years, and I'm sure is going to have a ripple effect. But because we had to close for a period of time due to COVID, and because the Deering Estate's resources are not as available as they usually are during COVID, I have extended the current artists in residence beyond September. So this is why it's kind of pushed everything back a little bit, because to be fair to them that didn't have access to their studios for several months and then haven't had access to a few other things, it's been challenging. So to be equitable and to be fair to all, we are extending the current artists in residence a bit longer, because usually they would be moving out by next month, and the new artists in residence would be moving in November, December. So we are being pushed back a little bit, but that won't affect the incoming artists, because you'll still have the same amount of time. That's not going to change anything. It's just pushing back the whole process a little bit. So the deadline will be December 1st. The application asks for a current resume or CV, an artist statement, a narrative bio about you as an artist, a letter of intent in terms of what you want to achieve at the Deering Estate, and then representations of your work that can include images, audio files, or videos. So the most impressive applications are those that really consider what the Deering Estate has to offer to you as an artist. So I highly encourage you, if you've not been, to come visit, and I can arrange for you to come and visit the estate whenever you want. You can shoot me an email. There's my contact information at the bottom, so that you can see it, you know, and really think about how it will fit into your practice. What are the things that you can get from it, and what type of residency you're really interested in. We have a fellowship that we offer. It's by invitation only to past artists in residence. So the fellowship is a 2-year residency by invitation that includes a stipend, and really involves that particular artist in a lot of our cultural programming and a lot of our internal initiatives. So to be eligible for that, you have to have at least been an artist in residence already. So that's something that you can build towards at this point. But really think about, you know, not just that, but how the site can really help you to achieve or push your work to the next level. You also have me as a resource. I'm not a naturalist. My background is in art history. I've never even been an artist. So I've always just been an avid supporter. And I've worked in a lot of institutions in South Florida. My master's thesis was on contemporary Italian art, so I spent some time abroad studying that. My interests vary in a lot of different things, including land art and performance art and installation art, but I've worked with a lot of different artists. I'm an arts writer, so I can help with proposals, and I'm a grant writer because we're always trying to look for grant funding. A lot of different artists have applied for grant projects as a result of being at the Deering Estate. So I work closely with them. Like right now we have 2 artists who were awarded the Night Arts Challenge. So, you know, on top of writing like letters of support for them, I'm helping them with guiding them to achieve and realize their projects here at the Deering Estate, even in a post-COVID world. So I really like to work as closely as I can with artists in question and that are part of the program. I also have an assistant who's a programs assistant who also works with the artists. So depending on what you need and what you're working on, you'll either be with me or with her. And we work with a lot of graduate interns. So there's usually different people on site that are really, really helpful with making sure that you have access to all the resources that you need. So with that, I kind of want to, let me see if I can unpause you all, or to make it easier, maybe you can use the hand raising option if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Okay. Lauren, call.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I have 2 questions for you. The first is, are these residency programs apart from the exhibition program that you spoke about at the beginning of your talk? Or is that all part of the same thing? I mean, must you be an artist in residence to be part of the exhibition program or not? I guess that's how the best way to phrase that.
Yeah, great question. So it's always my intent to exhibit artists in residence. However, the exhibition program is not mutually exclusive to the artist in residence. So if you feel like you want to propose an exhibition but not apply for the residency, you can do that 100%. You can just contact me and we'll look at our current exhibition schedule, and then you can go from there. But you can propose an exhibition that's not be an artist in residence. A number of the artists that you saw in that slideshow were not.
Okay, that's good to know. And then the other thing I was wondering is, do you have examples of previous submissions? You know, when you had that list of, you know, like the resume and I think a narrative biography, I think was something you had added. Do you have any examples that we could take a look at that you can post so we can see how previous artists have submitted? So we have an idea of what you're looking for more specifically, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the application will take care of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask some of the successful applicants if they're comfortable with that, but it's really self-explanatory. Like the process really takes you through everything in a very clear-cut way. And I will mention that always the most successful applications are ones that really take the Deering Estate into consideration. So if you're applying to like a number of residencies, which as artists you absolutely should, because you never know, you should always tailor them to that particular residency. So you're thinking about those resources and how they'll benefit you in your practice. So like artists who were really interested in native plants and talked about how they would use them and what they wanted to research, those tended to be the more successful applicants.
Okay, great.
Okay. Jennifer?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So sort of a very simple question. First of all, thank you for this today. Can an artist apply for both the studio residency and the project residency?
Yes. Yeah, you would just indicate that. There's a button that says like applying for studio, applying for project, or both. And you would just hit both.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else? Oh, there's a Galaxy. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Rafael Rodriguez.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, good.
My question is, I'm mainly a sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern is, what am I allowed to, in the studio to work on? What type of tools? What are the limits? That type of stuff.
You can use anything. You just
Yeah.
can't destroy the walls or put a hole in the floor. But if like paint splatters on the floor, if dust gets anywhere, that's fine. Like it can be messy because we can always clean that. But anything that permanently damages the building, we can't do. So if you need to like drill into the wall, that's why I retrofitted those wooden structures. But if you're chiseling, if you're using, I don't know, a chainsaw, all of that's fine. We do get visits from the fire marshal sometimes. So if we do, I might tell you you have to put something away, but that's it.
And when it comes to sculptures in the public places, are there limitations in size and interactions with type of projects, or is it very much open to whatever is possible?
So that's usually thought of on a case-by-case basis, but general rules of thumb is anything, because we are an environmental site, we don't like to go too deep into the ground, or anything that can hurt the environment is never going to be allowed. But and then in terms of sculpture, that's a case-by-case basis that, as with any public art program, we just have to make sure it's sound, you know, and that it's not going to fall. But we have different people that can help to make sure that everything works. And if you look at some of our archived artists, we've had really large scale sculpture and then smaller scale. So we don't shy away from any of that. We never put artwork, like let's say at the burial mound, because that just would hurt that land, and we don't kind of ever go near it, or change it or alter it in any way. But the rest of the grounds are pretty open for artwork.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else with a question? Oh, here we go. Evelyn?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry I was a little bit late. So, but I did catch something that you said, that it is you have a better chance if you were a resident someplace else. Is that true?
No, that's not. So it's for the fellowship. If you want to be considered to be a fellow in the future, that's only if you've already been a resident at the Deering Estate.
Okay.
But there's no requirement that you have to have participated in a residency before.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry I was late.
No problem. I recorded this, by the way, so it'll be up online, so you can revisit whatever you missed.
In your website?
I think it'll be on the YouTube channel, and then they'll share it on Facebook as well.
Okay, great. Thanks again.
Okay, let's see. Anyone else? Okay. Oh. Yes, hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. My name is Shibanya Contabs. As a painter, would you bring your materials there, and whatever you would need for painting?
Yes, great question. So we offer, so if you're a studio resident or project resident, there's no cost involved, but we don't charge anything, but we also don't provide anything. The only time there's a stipend involved is if you're exhibiting. So for exhibitions, I have an exhibition budget, so I can help with exhibiting artists, but for artists in residence, it's basically in kind. So you're getting either the studio or the resources, and then you'd be responsible for all your materials. If you want to use, like for example, we had an artist who wanted to paint with some berries, these blood berries that are found on site. So if you want to use natural material in your work, we just ask that you go with a naturalist. And so I would arrange that for you, and then they would help you gather that and cultivate that in an area that's safe for you to utilize in your work. But in terms of canvases and things like that, you would be responsible for that.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Anyone else? I think. Lauren, do you have another question?
Yeah, I had a quick question for you. I'm just curious about how many people apply for these residencies every year?
So I've been at the Deering Estate for a year and a half now. So I'm pretty new. Last year we had like 40 something applicants. And I looked at the previous years and it was higher. It was definitely higher, but I think we also marketed it a little bit more. So I can't say like historically how many artists have applied. I do expect a lot to apply this year, only because of the lack of being able to travel, and a lot of artist residencies are either not accepting applicants, or it's just people aren't really able to travel as much. So if I had to read the tea leaves, I think I might expect more applicants this year, but also I don't know. It's kind of a strange year. So I would say on average for me, it's been about 40.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else have any questions? So I don't see the hand tools. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch back to screen share just so that you have my contact information. And that way, and again, this will be available somewhere online, probably YouTube, and then I'll see if they can share it on Facebook. I can also email everybody a link to the presentation recording who signed up for the Eventbrite, but that's my phone number and my email. I will say that due to COVID, I'm half at the office and half working from home. So the best way to reach me is by email. And if you have any specific questions that maybe are really relevant to just your practice or your application, please feel free to reach out. And I look forward to hearing from you and learning more about each of your work. And yeah, thank you so much for spending this afternoon. Again, I wish, usually this is in person, so it's a little bizarre that I'm doing it this way, but hey, it's 2020, so what can you do? Thank you so much. And again, if you have to email me or any questions, I'm available. And thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.